Hey guys, and welcome back to our latest Building Heavy Tutors video. This is our first one back for the year of 2022.
Ooh.
And we're starting off with a bang with a lovely little economics video. Although, knowing us, it probably won't be that little. So today we will be going over the first unit of economics, which will look at things like the economic problem, how goods and resources, scarce resources are allocated. We're going to look at opportunity costs and some economic modelling and graphs. And then finally, we're going to look at the role of markets and also things like demand. So yeah, anything else you'd like to say before we get into it?
No, I think that's all. Thank you for watching.
See you next time.
We'll be back with business upload.
Yep, okay. See ya.
All right, firstly, we're going to start with the economic problem. So, what's the economic problem?
So the economic problem stipulates that whilst resources are scarce, wants and needs of individuals and consumers are unlimited. So what that means for us is that we have scarcity, firstly, which is the fact that resources that exist naturally are limited. We have wants, which are things that an individual may want to purchase or to own, and that they are willing to pay for. But these are unlimited. Obviously, they are a bit different to needs because the needs are limited, whereas wants are something that can be unlimited because you can want as many things as you want. And then finally we have resources, which are limited, as we've said, and there are four main resources, as we're going to a little bit later, which are land, labour, capital, and enterprise.
Is there any other name for those?
No, it's not.
No. I wouldn't call them factors of production.
Yes, you could also call them factors of production.
Only if you want a good mark, though.
Yeah, and so the economic problem seeks to answer how these scarce resources should be properly allocated to fulfil consumers and society's needs and wants.
That's wonderful.
Yes,
it's also important to note that different people in society have different needs and wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
For example, like a private school boy like Jeremy, he might want to find some friends or some mates, while someone else, like an economics teacher, might want to find a source of happiness or some sort of purpose in life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's just about looking at different perspectives and what they might prioritise as their main want.
Yeah, 100%. So the next thing we're going to look at today is the four factors of production and then their returns. So Luke, do you want to start us off with your first two?
My first two?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start with land.
Sure.
It's land. Land is a complicated idea.
Yes.
So it's the land that a business or a firm can use to produce their good or service. And the factor return of land is rent.
Yeah, so just before we go any further with that, when we refer to factors of production, these are four things that you need in order to make something as a business. So obviously, as Lucas just mentioned, we've got land being our first factor of production, because if you're a business and you want to make something, you have to physically have somewhere to make that thing. And so as Luke said, the return on that is called rent, because each one of these factors provides some sort of income to the person that owns it. So for land, the potential income is rent. Now the next one, which I will look at, is labour. So obviously labour is crucial to to produce things as a business as well, because you need somebody to produce things. So labour is pretty much the easiest one. So obviously people give their labour, they work, they produce things, and then businesses will have that production. And the return on labour, this is what most individuals get, is called income, or potentially wages as well. So you can use either of those terms interchangeably. And so essentially, if I provide my labour, so I own my own labour, I provide it to the business, they return to me wages.
Next, we'll go over enterprise.
Sure.
Enterprise is the human aspect of a firm.
Yes, it's the human aspect.
Yeah, it's the human aspect of a firm, and the factor return is profit. So when a business sells their good or service, they make profit.
They make a profit,
yeah,
absolutely.
Complicated as that is.
And the reason why people get a return for enterprise is because enterprise requires risk-taking by an individual to start up a business, and it also requires some innovation. So yeah, the return on that is therefore profit. And then finally we have capital. So capital, or capital goods, as you may hear them referred to, are the things that are required to physically produce whatever you're making. So that could be, for example, a piece of machinery or something like that. It could also be economic capital, which can just be sort of money or some sort of investment. And so the return on that is called interest, which is obviously the interest that you get on owning that thing and then making the money as a result of that. And so that's our four factors of production and their returns.
Very well put,
Yes,
Jeremy.
thank you.
Now we'll move on to the types of goods. So there's two types of goods. Firstly, there's consumer goods, and secondly, there is capital goods. So consumer goods. Consumer goods are goods that are purchased by consumers, believe it or not. They provide immediate satisfaction for consumer wants. And these come in forms such as single-use goods, such as food or petrol, or durable goods, such as a TV or phone, something that's a bit more long-term. Then we've got capital goods, which are produced means of production. So it's used to produce more consumer goods and capital goods in the future. So for example, you could build more machinery.
Absolutely.
Build more machinery, some production lines, which allows businesses to produce more consumer goods to be bought and sold later. It's also important to note that capital goods over time are subject to depreciation and they'll need to be replaced. And now that we've got those types of goods done, let's look at how we allocate resources to produce those types of goods. Jeremy, take us away.
Yeah, so this obviously brings us back into the economic problem, which says that our limited resources must be correctly allocated to produce goods and services which will satisfy the consumer's needs and wants. So the first main way that resources are distributed in an economy is keenly focused on the distribution of income in that economy. So this is a fairly obvious point if you look at it, but the people who get more of the distribution of income, so they have more than their fair share of the income, are able to purchase more goods and services than somebody who has less income than them. Therefore, the scarce resources go more to people who have more income, as they are able to purchase more, and therefore they are taking more of the resources away. So what we see there is that businesses and the market in general allocates more resources to those people who have more money and more income because they can afford to buy those resources from businesses.
That's well put again from Jeremy.
Thank you.
So the next way that we can allocate resources in society is based on consumer demand. So when society demands a certain good or service, businesses are more likely to produce those goods because they're going to make money from that. Therefore, they're going to allocate more of their resources, the factors of production, the land, labour, enterprise and capital, to producing those goods and services, and that's how they allocate it.
Yeah. Our next point here is the 4 questions that businesses need to ask during production. So when a business seeks to produce a good or service to potentially satisfy some demand in the market, they need to ask the questions of what to produce, how to produce, who to produce it for, and then also how to distribute that good. So in terms of these questions, we've firstly got the pretty obvious ones. What to produce, which is obviously a business needs to determine what they're going to make, which they can come up with through seeing maybe where there's a gap in the market, where they can find something to fill that. Then our next question is how to produce that. They need to take into account the resources that they have available, particularly land, labour and capital, to be able to see how they will actually be able to produce those goods and services. We then have the question of for who to produce. So this is where they need to look at the market, see who's going to potentially be able to be buying their products that they're going to sell, and think about how they're going to produce in a way which is going to suit them. And finally, how to distribute. So once they have their goods, they need to work out how they're going to get that out to the consumers who are going to be able to purchase them. Say sending them through supermarkets or wholesale centres. Oh no? No. Okay. That's unfortunate. But yes, what's our next point on this topic?
Next point and final one on how to allocate, we're going to look at the different types of economies and how that can influence who controls the allocation of resources. So as you can see somewhere on the screen will be a lovely scale which will go all the way from free on one side to controlled on the other side. So in terms of the 2 extremes, on the control side we have Marxism as a wonderful example, and this involves complete central planning from the government. So the government has complete control over how the resources are allocated. And on the other side we have a laissez-faire economic system. Laissez-faire literally means let it go, and it's sort of the idea that we trust.
Like Frozen?
Yep, it was based on the Frozen movie.
Frozen, okay, excellent.
And it's essentially just trust that businesses know what's best and are able to allocate resources better than the government is because of their experience in the market. In the middle of that, we have a mixed market economy, or a Keynesian theory.
Sure.
Which is what Australia has assigned themselves, which is a combination of both. Seems to work pretty well at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And then each political party as well will assign themselves somewhere along the scale. So the Liberal National Party is more on the free side, while the Labor Party is a little more to the controlled side. Both are pretty central.
Yeah. Yeah, so as Luke's just wonderfully said for us there.
Thank you, sir.
Some economies, we've obviously got free market, so that means the market is available for everybody to partake in. businesses are really supported in the free market, and there's lots of opportunities for essentially consumers through consumer sovereignty, which means that we essentially decide how resources are going to be allocated. Whereas on the other side, we have a centrally planned economy, which is where, obviously, as Luke said, the government chooses where all the resources are allocated. And this means there's less things like choice, because the consumer's demand for particular products doesn't actually influence what is produced.
We love less choice.
We absolutely, that's correct.
So now we'll move on to opportunity cost.
This is a good one.
I love opportunity
This
cost.
is a really good one. Yeah, so just to start us off with a definition of opportunity cost, it's a pretty simple one. So what we want to say there is that the opportunity cost of making one decision is any economic cost to the decision maker for choosing to make one decision over its next best alternative. So that last bit there about the next best alternative is absolutely crucial, because you can't say that in making one decision, you have to, the opportunity cost is for every other potential decision. It's the cost of making one decision compared to the next best option. So for example, if my two options, first best option is to buy a house, second best option is to buy 3 cars, what would be then the opportunity cost of me choosing to buy the 3 cars? The opportunity cost would be the house, because in buying the 3 cars, I don't get that house.
Very well put.
Thank you.
So yeah, with opportunity cost, it's all about consumer choice. So the main goal for consumers is to maximize their utility. What a great line.
Yes.
So pretty much that just means consumers, a rational consumer will want to maximize the satisfaction. They'll want to make the choice that's going to make them the happiest, either now or in the long term. So we're going to get another example, I reckon.
What's that example going to be?
Alright, Jeremy's at the canteen at lunchtime.
Absolutely.
Jeremy's got $5 to spend.
$5.
He saved that money from his expenditure on mates.
Sure.
So he's going to be eating alone either way here. Jeremy has 4 options. Jeremy could buy a refreshing cold drink.
Contract.
Jeremy could buy a chocolate. Jeremy could buy a sandwich. Or Jeremy could buy a packet of chips.
Okay.
For the sake of this example, we're going to assume that all of 4 of these options are priced the same. Jeremy, what are you going to pick?
I will be picking the drink.
Jeremy's going to take the drink to go drink alone. So,
like normal?
like normal, by buying the drink, Jeremy is maximizing his utility. However, it comes at the opportunity cost of enjoying the sandwich or the chips or the drink. Or whatever the next best alternative
Yes,
in
but we have to
Jeremy's
remember,
perspective is.
in this case, they can't all be the opportunity
Right.
cost. I would have to potentially say that I would choose the drink first, and my second choice would be the chocolate. So then the opportunity cost of choosing the drink is the chocolate, because that was my next best alternative. And so our next thing on opportunity cost, we'll be looking at the implications of decision making for 3 different groups in society. So firstly, for individuals. So individuals, we know, purchase goods and services to try and maximise their utility in potentially the short term or the long term. So they have 2 potential decisions that they can make. They can either save their money when they get it, or they can choose to spend it. If they choose to save, they lose utility in the short term because they are foregoing the next best alternative, which was to spend, which would have maximised their utility. And so yeah, they choose to lose this utility in the short term, but they increase it in the long term, because once they have this money saved, they can later spend it, and so then they will have higher utility in the long term.
Just to clarify, so the example before might be a bit confusing because Jeremy is sad all the time, but when he bought the drink, he was slightly less sad, so there's an increase in utility.
Of course, so it's slightly increased.
He's maximised it as much as he can.
Even though I might still be sad at all stages, I will at least have slightly more utility. But as I've said here, so the other option for consumers is to spend, which would mean that they would be maximising their utility in the short term, but they would lose out on this consumption later in life, which is then the opportunity cost for them. We then have our next group being businesses. So businesses produce goods and services in order to make profits / maximise their profits, and the implications for them is that they can choose to invest or to not invest. So in this case, with their investment, that could mean that when they get their profits at the end of the financial year, they could choose to take that money and invest it back into the business to, say, buy more machines to produce more goods. Yeah, so let's say they choose to invest and buy some new machinery. In the short term, it will cost them some time and money to retrain their employees to be able to operate these new machines, or to bring in more new employees. And it would also decrease the amount of money that the owners or the shareholders would get, because obviously if they're taking this profit and putting it back into the business, there's then less short-term profit. However, in the long term, what they see is more efficiency, because they have more machines, they can produce more, and more long-term profit. The other option is to not invest, which means that in the short term, they keep this short-term profit, but the opportunity cost there is that they lose out on that increased efficiency and increased ability to produce in the long term. Now, finally, here we have the government, who they spend money on infrastructure and they try to balance revenue with spending. So in the short term, they can choose to spend, which means that they will spend on more infrastructure, say some roads. This would lead to short-term growth, jobs, demand, and it would lead to long-term efficiency and productivity as well. But the opportunity cost here is that it would harm the budget because they would be spending more than they've taken in tax revenue. The other option here is to save, but this will mean that in the short term, they'll get a budget balance, which is good, but the opportunity cost here is that they lose out on that long-term productivity and those long-term surpluses. So that is the cost of some different decisions for different groups. Just whenever Luke's back with us.
Oh, sorry, I was just watching the grass grow outside because that was incredibly more interesting than listening to Jeremy speak. So now we'll move on to a bit of theory about economic modelling, and then we'll relate that back to a few graphs about opportunity cost. So economic modelling allows us to simplify complex and real-world behaviour in relationships, and this allows us, Jeremy is doing some economic modelling. What a great career path change that would be. And allows us to simplify real-world problems and relationships, and then we can later complicate them if we need to. And a great example of this is the circular flow of income, which we'll get to later as well.
Yes, we will.
However, the economic models do make assumptions about human behaviour, such as that it's fair to assume that consumers will act in their best self-interest and that they'll behave in a rational manner to maximise their utility. So, let's talk about the PPC, Production Possibility Curve, and the Production Possibility Schedule, and those sort of topics. So the four key assumptions that this graph makes. Firstly, is that this graph assumes that the economy only produces two types of goods with limited or finite resources. So they can only produce, in the example that we're going to use, they can only produce units of food or units of mates. Secondly, the PPC assumes that all resources are fully employed. So at any point on the PPC, the production possibility curve, it represents a full employment of the resources in an economy. Thirdly, it assumes that the level of technology is fixed, so there's no changes in the level of technology unless it gets complicated later, but at the most basic level, technology is fixed. And fourthly, it assumes that the resources are fixed or finite. However, they can be allocated to the production of one good or another based on what society demands and that allocation of resources that we had before.
Wow. Okay, excellent. All right, so we're now going to look at the graphs that Luke was just mentioning. We're going to have the PPC, which can also be called the PPF. That's Production Possibility Frontier for the F, or Curve for the C. Both of them mean essentially the same thing and can be substituted in for each other. So, but to back this up, we obviously need the data for them, which is what we get from a PPS, or Production Possibility Schedule. So we have an example Production Possibility Schedule somewhere up here. So what these curves and frontiers and schedules all describe is what a business, or potentially an economy, can produce with the finite resources they have. So obviously what we see is that businesses, as we've said, the economic problem, resources are limited. They can't just produce an unlimited amount of everything. So what we see on this schedule here, we've got units of food and units of mates. So let's say my business, Jeremy's business is trying to produce things for me. So I can either choose to produce units of food to feed my family, or units of mates. So mates for me, so that I maybe have some friends. Right, so what we see here is as one of them goes up, the other one goes down. So we see that as the number of mates goes from 0 produced up to 4 produced, the amount of food goes down from 20 units of food, to 0 units of food. And the reason
relationship.
It's an inverse relationship, that's absolutely correct. And the reason for this is, let's say I have 50 resources, if I produce more mates with my resources, I have less resources left to produce food with. So what we see from this schedule is that if I choose to produce, say, 4 mates, I won't have any resources left to produce food, because that, as you can see on the schedule, now goes down to 0. Whereas if I choose to produce 1 mate, I have the resources left to produce 15 food. So it's up to our business or an economy to determine how they want to divide up those resources, which we will see plotted on the PPC or PPF. And so this ties back into opportunity cost, because obviously a business or an economy choosing to produce more of one has a cost and that being the lack of production of the other good. So if I choose to produce 4 mates, as we said, I now have produced no food. So that means that the opportunity cost of producing 4 mates is 20 units of food, because from going from 0 units of mates to 4 units of mates, I go from 20 units of food to 0 units of food. So the opportunity cost of going from 0 to 4 is 20 to 0 is 20. Right, unsurprisingly, Luke has left. You'll see another aspect of this video, being Kim sitting probably alone late at night recording some more of it because he decided to leave, but that's okay. You get a bit more of me here in this same location. So I'll finish off what we were saying just there, and then we will go through, I will finish off a little section on the PPF and PPC, and then you'll see me a bit later going through the section on markets. Yeah, so as we were just saying with the marginal rate of substitution, Luke attempted to do some maths and it sort of failed, so maybe he actually left out of sadness. But anyway, I'll go through it properly. So we've got our PPS up here somewhere. Right, so we see we've got our mates across the top, food across the bottom. What we see here is that as we increase from 0 mates to 1 mate, we go down from 20 foods to 15 foods. We've made this quite easy by making the scale of mates just be 1, because that means that as we increase our food by 1, we decrease our mates by 5. So therefore, the marginal rate of substitution for mates is 5, because that means that if you substituted the resources for 1 mate into making food, you'd end up with 5 foods. Now you can do it the other way for what is the marginal rate of substitution for food in an economy, and you can say, well, if I took 1 unit of food, how many mates am I getting? Well, I'm not going to get 1 mate, am I? Because if I decrease our units of food by 1, the mates doesn't obviously go up to 1. We've now got 19 foods and a little bit of mates. So what do? Well, we say, okay, well, if I decrease my food by 5, then I go up 1 mate. So then what we can say is, okay, well, a decrease of 5 in food gets us 1 more mate. So what's a decrease of 1 in food going to get us? Well, we divide that side and that side by 5, and so we get 1 equals 1 over 5. So we can say that the marginal rate of substitution for food is 1 on 5, because if I substituted 1 unit of food into mates, I would get 1 on 5 mates. So that's how marginal rate of substitution works. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, very unfortunate. So then what we've got is our PPF and PPC. I'll again move out of the way for this. This one's pretty easy. All it does is graph or chart, I guess you could say, the information that is in our PPS onto something that you can read. Right, so we've got it here. Cross here, down is good A, cross there is good B. On good A, we're going to have food. So going up here is food, cross there is mates. So what we see is we have our food increasing, just as we spoke of before, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, and we've got our units of mates. So we've got our 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, we don't have a 5, we've got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, so then what we can do is draw a line. Okay, so you start it, you go 20 to 0, 15 to 1, 10 to 2, 5 to 3, and 0 to 4. And then you can draw a line straight across there like that, and boom, there is your PPF or PPC. So what that means is that we've got our line here. That means you can go across, and at each level of the graph, so say you can go across, if you look at where we have 15 units of food, you can go across to the line and see, okay, well that would get me 1 mate. And so that's what you can say there. So you can say, when the business uses their resources to produce 15 units of food, they can also produce 1 mate. But you can see down the bottom here, if they use 0 of their resources for food, they can make 4 mates. So that's essentially how that works. Now, for an economy or a business, we also have a few other important things about where our lines are. So this line here, the curve or the frontier line, represents a business or an economy operating at 100% efficiency. So that means that every one of their resources, all of their factors of production, are working as well as they can. So that means every member of the labour force of a business or an economy is working and working to the best of their ability. It means that all technology, and every machine is running and running at full capacity. and it means that the land is being used as efficiently as it can be, and enterprise as well. Now, obviously, as we know, for a business or for an individual economy, that won't happen. So this curve here represents if everything was at 100% efficiency, but we know that that can't happen because obviously there will always be somebody at home sick, or there will be a machine that's broken and not able to produce. So we will never operate at 100% efficiency. So that means that economies could be somewhere like in here, or just below the line. So if you're below the line, that's where most economies or businesses would be, because it means that they're not operating everything at 100% efficiency. Now, if we have a point outside the line or further from the curve, that represents something that is not currently possible, because obviously the economy is not currently able to produce that much with the resources they have. They cannot operate beyond 100% efficiency. So how do we get to a point out there? We do that by shifting the curve. So that could be from a number of things, including an advancement in technology. That's a good example to use, where you can say that if technology becomes more advanced and more efficient, then we're able to have higher efficiency production, and therefore they would then be able to produce goods out at that level. So you can only shift the curve that way if you have higher efficiency technology or more workers or something like that. So that is PPFs and PVCs, and what we see finally there is if we shift from point here, let's say we have a point at 10 and 2, so that's approximately half resources, not exactly, but if we choose to produce 2 units of mates and 10 units of food, that's about in the middle. If we shift that then, we can shift up one way to produce more food and less mates, or we can shift down the other way, which would produce more mates, but then obviously less food. And so what we can describe is we can describe the opportunity cost of a shift from A, which is up here, to B, or from B to C, or whatever. So if we shift from A down to B, what we see is that the opportunity cost is 5 units of food. Because yes, we do get 1 extra mate, but the opportunity cost is the 5 units of food which were not produced. So that is PPFs and PPCs and PPS and opportunity costs and all of that. Now you'll hear from Luke on a bit more economic modelling, and then you'll hear from me a little bit later on markets.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, obviously a bit of a change of scenery at the moment. Few things came up, few circumstances, which has made this video taken a bit more of an individual turn, but that is completely fine. In fact, it's probably better for you because at least you get a break from Jeremy for a bit now. Not really sure how it's going to be structured, so you might have already had Jeremy for a bit and I could just be repeating what he's saying, but let's hope not. Yeah, I'm going to go through a few economic models. I'm going to go through the circular flow of income and the business cycle. 2 topics that aren't that hard, so I'll try and whip through them so you can get back to Jeremy. But yeah, I guess we'll just get straight into it. So yeah, let's get started with the circular flow of income. So the circular flow of income is essentially what I talked about before when I was going over why we use models in economics. It's pretty much just a simplification of the economy. The circular flow of income has 5 sectors, however you can also start with 2. So let's start with 2. So firstly, we have households, which is just individuals in the economy, individuals who own income and how they use that income. And in that same sector, we have firms, which is just businesses who buy productive resources and make factor income payments such as wages, interest, the stuff we talked about before, and then they use those resources which they buy to produce goods and services. So in this model, and you'll be able to see it somewhere on the screen, both of these sectors in the model contribute to the other sector. So households are contributing consumption or expenditure to businesses, so they're buying the goods and services that the firms are producing, and households also provide their labour to businesses, and again, that is one of the factors of production which we talked about before, so it's nice to see everything linking back together. In return for the household's labour, firms give income to the households, which they can then use to consume. It's a cycle, and firms also provide the goods and services to the households. So that's at the most basic level. I'm just going to go through the rest of it now, and then we'll go into a few more key points that will be useful to know when answering some questions about the model. So next we have the financial sector, which is just all the financial institutions in an economy. So for example, banks, households provide their savings to the financial sector, and then the financial sector provides back investment to firms and to businesses. So we have the government sector, who raise revenue via taxes, and then That's like what households provide to them, and they provide collective goods and services through government spending. And finally, we have the overseas sector, which is the import and export of goods and services, and this is all international transactions. So we've got households getting imports from overseas when they're consuming products made overseas, and then we have exports, which is products made in Australia going out to other countries. Okay, so key takeaways. So in the model, which should still be up, you'll be able to see all the letters next to the contributions that each sector make to the economy. So yeah, keep that in mind, and then that should make all of these little equation sort of things a fair bit easier. So firstly, we have income, or Y equals expenditure. Expenditure is just another word for consumption. I thought I'd make it a bit more complicated for you to try and remember by using the different words. So enjoy that. Yeah, this is quite obvious. Obviously, the level of income can't exceed the level of expenditure because consumers can't just buy stuff if they don't have money. Yeah, it's pretty much as simple as that. But at the same time, the level of expenditure has to equal the level of output. So if the expenditure has taken place, then that money has to be used to purchase the goods and services, which is the output made by the businesses. Okay, secondly, on the left side of the circular flow of income, we have leakages. So there's three leakages, which are savings, taxation, and imports. So a leakage refers to money that's leaving the economy or isn't contributing to output or GDP. And then alternatively, on the right side, we have three injections. So those are investment, government spending, and exports. And an injection is the opposite. It refers to money which is contributing to the economy and is being put back into the economy. So, like for example, if consumers are saving money, then that's not contributing to like buying goods or services. It's just being held in a bank. And if they're buying imports from overseas, that money is going to overseas economies, not back to the Australian economy. And alternatively, for injections, for example, exports, if we're sending goods made in Australia overseas, then that's extra money overseas coming back into the Australian economy. So the balance between the amount of leakages and injections determine the economic position. So we have three economic positions. Firstly, we can be expanding as an economy, we can be contracting as an economy, or we can be an economy in equilibrium. So for an economy in contraction, we have essentially that leakages are greater than injections. So this looks like STM is greater than IGX. So savings, taxation, and imports added together is greater than investment, government spending, and exports. And that would equal a contraction in the economy. Secondly, we have an expansion in the economy, so the leakages are less than the injections. So again, STM is less than IGX. There's less savings, taxation, and imports than there are investment, government spending, and exports. Thirdly, we have an equilibrium, an economy in equilibrium, and this is when STM equals IGX. So they're exactly the same. The economy is not expanding or contracting. So yeah, a lot of different content there. But at the end of the day, it's not that hard. The letters make it sound a lot more complicated than it is. But it is really quite simple at the end of the day. Anyway, let's look at it in a more individual basis. So let's look at the overseas sector first. So if exports are greater than imports, then Australia or the economy has a trade surplus. And on the other side, if it's a trade deficit, then imports are greater than exports. So again, if X is greater than M, exports greater than imports, then we have a surplus, a trade surplus. Or if X is less than M, then we have a trade deficit. So finally, on this topic, we've got the government sector. So if government spending is greater than taxation, then that means there's a budget deficit. And if government spending is less than taxation, then this means there is a budget surplus. Again, using the letters, we have G is greater than T. Government spending greater than taxation equals a budget deficit. And then G is less than T equals a budget surplus. So a lot of the time in exams, this information will come in a fancy table, which I'll put up just for reference of what you're going to be looking at. A lot of the time there'll be like one economy for 1 year, so it'll be one economy, and then I'll have all the letters and the contributions to the circular flow of income for 1 year, and then I'll have the second year, and you have to add the letters up to find the answer to typically a multi-question. And it really, I know maybe I've made it sound more complicated than it is, but it really isn't that complicated once you sort of understand the nuances of it. All right, the final part that I'll be talking about is the business cycle. Again, this is quite simple. If you've done United Commerce, you would have done this then. Essentially, the business cycle is just a visual representation of the fluctuation in the level of economic activity. So this is, measured in GDP, gross domestic product, that an economy goes through over a period of time. So there's not too much you really need to know here. It's more just being able to like identify the different points on the business cycle, and then looking at like what sort of government policy would be taking place at that point in the cycle. So I'll put the cycle up somewhere here, left or right. Yeah, get into it. All right, so on the y-axis, we have the total output or GDP. All right, let's look at the labeling of that business cycle. All right, so in the business cycle, there's 4 different stages or 4 phases, which you'll be able to see labeled on the graph. So firstly, we have a period of expansion. So again, this is just when expenditure, output, income, and employment levels rise. So the level of production in the economy is rising. And we're building up to the next phase, which is a peak, which is when expenditure, output, income, and employment levels reach a maximum point as the economic activity in the economy peaks. After a peak, we move into a period of contraction. So this is when those things, again, expenditure, output, income, and employment levels start to fall as the economy decelerates. And finally, we have a trough, which is the bottom of one of those curves, and it's just the opposite of a peak. It's when expenditure, output, income, and employment levels reach a minimum point as economic activity troughs. And then again, it's going to move back up and move into the next cycle. So one full cycle, one full business cycle has all four of those parts. So the contraction phase is more of a section, and the expansion phase is a section, while the peak and the trough are specific points on the cycle. Yeah, so it's really not that hard. It's more just being able to identify what the graph means and what the certain points are. And then again, knowing what the government policy is. So in periods of expansion, the government is going to use contractionary policy. So this is a policy that's going to aim to limit inflation. So they might increase interest rates, increase the minimum amount of reserve banks have to have, things along those lines. If you want more in depth about this, you can go to our Year 10 Commerce video. I'm sure it's in there from Jeremy. And then in periods of contraction, or when we're in a trough, governments are going to be using expansionary government policy. So they're going to decrease interest rates and look to encourage consumers to take out money and spend more money in the economy to get us back on that expansionary period. Yeah, it is a late afternoon on a Saturday, and I can see why economic teachers love their jobs, because this is filling me with joy telling you all this. But luckily, I've got through what I needed to tell you. I think you'll be going back to Jeremy now. Hopefully, you've got a decent idea of the two cycles. I'm sure that Jeremy will have more interesting stuff to say right now.
Right, markets, we'll do this really quickly. Well, not that quickly, but I'll run through it. So, the market refers to an exchange between groups in an economy, for example, an exchange of goods and services for income. So that's where a business or a firm provides goods and services to a consumer, and they in exchange give income back to the business. So that is an example of a market, and that's essentially what a market is. So how do markets solve the economic problem? So the most important part of the market is to determine price. And then the price mechanism, which is something we'll explore a little bit later, enables the market system to allocate these scarce resources and solve the economic problem. So in a market, free market or mixed market economy, the market is what does the allocation of resources. So because consumers demand certain things and they all have a certain price, then our scarce resources can be allocated in some way. So this works in a market economy through demand and supply. So what we will then talk about next is price. So we have a few things under price. Firstly, relative price. So obviously we all know what price is, but in an economic sense, price could be like the financial cost of somebody to somebody of buying something. So if I wanted to buy Ollie, he would maybe be $5 worth of price. So the relative price, which is a slightly different term of a good or service or factor of production, is the price compared to its next best alternative. So this is tying back to the next best alternative that we talked about with opportunity cost. But what this does is it helps in the process for individuals or firms or economies. It helps them in the process of deciding whether to purchase one good or factor of production, taking into account the opportunity cost. For example, if a movie ticket cost $20 and a book cost $60, then in terms of relative price, the book is more expensive than the movie ticket. And so that means that in this case, with our marginal rate of substitution, the opportunity cost of the movie is 0.33 books, because in choosing to buy one movie, I'm letting go of a third of a book. But in choosing to buy a book, the opportunity cost is 3 movies, which I'm foregoing. So that is relative price. Now, then we're going to look at the functions of price in a market. Price has 5 key functions. So firstly, it reflects the relative scarcity of goods and services. So what this means is that if there is high demand for something and there's not much of it, it's scarce, the price will be high, because we know that if there's demand for something and people want it, but there's not many, it means that businesses can put up the price, and that means that obviously the price will be higher. Next, what it does is it helps to allocate scarce resources. As I've already gone over, the price of particular goods and services helps determine where resources will go in an economy. Thirdly, it acts as an incentive to producers to make stuff. So if the price of something can be high or low, that means that when the price is high, businesses are going to want to supply more, because the more that they can sell at this high price, the more money they will make. Fourthly, it acts as a rationing device. So this means that when demand outstrips supply, so when more people want things than there are, it forces people to ration out their resources. For example, in the case we couldn't buy all of the movie tickets and the book, so we had to ration out our resources. And our final one is that it acts as an equilibrating device. Now, don't take my word on that as to whether or not that's an actual word, but essentially what it does is it brings the market to equilibrium, because as we see, as I'm going to go over in a second, when the price rises, people want less of it, and so then it brings it back in. So that ties us nicely into the last thing that we'll talk about in this video, which is demand. So I'm sure everybody's heard of demand. It's a pretty common word, but there are a few things that we need to know about it here. So firstly, the law of demand. So we're going to go over firstly individual demand and market demand and what they mean, and then what the law of demand states. So individual demand is defined as the quantity of a good or service that an individual or individual consumers are willing and able to buy at all different price levels. So they have to be willing to buy it, they have to want it, but they also have to be able to buy it. So they have to be able to afford it for it to count in price. And so yeah, this is at all different price levels. And then market demand is just the demand by all consumers in one particular market. So individual demand is just you, but market demand is the demand of everybody else participating in your market. So the law of demand states for us that as the price of a product, or the relative price of a good or service increases, the quantity demanded by consumers decreases. So this is where we get the lovely little demand curve, which we've got up here. It looks quite similar to your PPFs or PPCs, but I promise it's a bit different. So once we get down, we've got this, boom, straight across like that. So what this shows us, if we have our points marked here at P and Q. On this axis, we've got P, which is the price of the good or service or product. And on this axis, we've got Q, which refers to the quantity demanded by an individual or by consumers generally. So we've got price, quantity. Then we've got our line across here, which is labeled D for demand. That shows the curve of the demand for that product. So if we have our point here, first point here, P1, that's in there. Draw a line straight across, straight down, that's P. Sorry, that's not P, that's Q. So that shows that Q1. So at P1, at this price at P1, whatever price it is, you can draw it across and draw it down to say that that quantity at Q1 is demanded. So what we could have is we could have a shift up to something like P2. So we had P1 there before, we've got P2 now. So what we see there is that the price has increased. We've gone up that axis to P2. So we're going to draw across, draw down to Q2. We're now going to see that here, obviously Q2, and bear in mind if my fingers are not pointing actually at anything, that's because our diagrams are a bit different, but just look at the diagrams up there. But let's say we're down here at Q2. Q2 is obviously less than Q1. So what that shows us there is as the price of a good or service or factor has increased, the quantity demanded has decreased. Now let's show it the other way. If we were to move from P1, where we had originally, down to P3, we can draw across, down to Q3, and we now see that at that lower price, more is demanded. So this is pretty simple. Obviously, we know that if they started charging, I don't know, let's say at the canteen, sausage roll costs $3. If at the current price, we're at P1, it's going to demand Q1. If they increase the price, less people are going to want to buy them. So the quantity demanded is going to decrease, because if it's more expensive, you're not going to want to buy it as much. Whereas if they decrease the price, it's going to seem like a bargain, so more people are going to want to buy it. So what we can see here is as we shift from P1 to P2, which is that increase in price, what we see is that the price has risen, the quantity demanded has fallen. But I don't want you to say fallen, you have to say that the quantity demanded has contracted. So as price rises, demand contracts. So you don't say goes down, don't say gets smaller, you want to say contracts. Now the other way is when we see that the price goes from P1 down to P3. So the price has decreased, we say that the demand has now expanded. And so this is similar terms that we heard back in the business cycle and back in the circular flow of income, but that's a sort of terminology that you should use. So the reason why we have that change is because in the change from P1 to P2, so there's now less demand, this is because the price has become relatively higher and the opportunity cost of purchasing that product is now more. So people are less likely to purchase it and therefore the demand for it will fall. So that move there is a contraction. So that is demand and price and the role of markets and different types of markets. And that actually caps off our economics video and our first video for the year. I'm not sure if Luke will also give a little sign off, but that's fine. I'm here to do it now. And Oliver, our amazing scriptwriter, is also here now as well. So thank you for watching this video. Hopefully we'll be able to bring you lots more great videos throughout the year. But hopefully this was helpful. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, or leave a comment. We always like reading them. Dan, if you're out there, please comment. But yes, thank you everybody. Hope this was helpful. Good luck in any economics tests or exams you may have coming up, and we will see you all next time.